So I'm joined by Senator Cotton here today. This will be the tall, short version of what to do about Iran. President Trump and Biden have had a common view that Iran cannot get a nuclear weapon. That's off the table. Why did they say that? It'd be the most destabilizing thing in the world, I believe. If Iran ever acquired a nuclear weapon capability, I think the Sunni Arab world would want to go down that road also. You'd have a nuclear arms race in the Mideast. But more importantly to me, I think they would use it. I think if Iran had a nuclear weapon, they would use it as part of their radical religious regime. The Ayatollah and his henchmen are virtual religious Nazis. They openly talk about destroying the state of Israel. They write it on the side of their missiles, and I believe them. I believe that they want to purify Islam, take over the holy sites in Saudi Arabia, wipe out the Jewish state, and drive us out of the Mideast. And a nuclear weapon is part of that agenda. It's not an insurance policy for regime survivability. It is a weapon to carry out one of the most extreme religious ideas on the planet. So here's what we're doing today. Senator Cotton and I believe that the only way to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon is for them to completely dismantle their enrichment program. Without enriching uranium, you cannot make a nuclear weapon. That is non-negotiable for us. Complete dismantlement. President Trump said that this weekend, and in our resolution, we describe in granular detail what dismantlement would look like. So if you want to know what the Senate Republicans think about dismantlement, you can read this resolution, and this resolution mirrors what Israel would be believes to be an acceptable outcome on dismantlement. They have enough highly enriched uranium, the Iranians do, to make at least 6 nuclear weapons. Now, Senator Cotton is the Intel chairman. He knows this space far better than I. But the difference between 60% enriched uranium and 90 is a very short walk. The stockpile they have achieved, again, would allow them, with just a little bit of time and extra effort, to produce 6 nuclear weapons at a minimum. What I want people to understand is that the Iranians claim that they enrich for peaceful nuclear power purposes, that their enrichment program is designed to make sure they have fuel for their reactor, their peaceful nuclear reactor. The question becomes, how much of the enriched uranium have they used regarding the Bashir reactor? Not 1 gram. They get their spent fuel to run the reactor from the Russians, and I'm okay with that. I'm okay with Iran having peaceful nuclear power. I'm okay with them building new nuclear power plants as long as they don't enrich. That the nuclear fuel supply comes from outside of Iran, it will be completely controlled. I'm okay with a 1-2-3 agreement with Iran like we have with the United Arab Emirates after they completely dismantle their enrichment program. And the history of this program is full of lying and cheating. The IAEA has caught Iran lying and cheating more times than I can count. So we're going to call the question sooner rather than later on Iran. This resolution by myself and Senator Cotton is designed to buy into the concept being pushed by the Trump administration. Complete dismantlement, and then, and only then, talking about a 1-2-3 arrangement for peaceful nuclear power. Anything short of that would be a bad deal. Anything short of that, I think, would ensure over time they get a nuclear weapon. President Trump, I spoke with him this weekend. He believes a nuclear weapon in the hands of Iran would be a nightmare for the world, and he is exactly right. So to the Iranian regime, you claim all you want is a peaceful nuclear power program, you can have it, but you cannot enrich. And you must dismantle, and you must dismantle now. If negotiation and diplomacy fails, we need to go to Plan B. And Plan B would be a military strike to stop the nuclear program in its tracks and degrade it as much as we can. I will turn it over to Senator Cotton now, but end with where I started. The world has many problems. Russia, Ukraine, we're in trade conflicts. I think we had some good news today with the UK, and it looks like the critical minerals deal was approved in Ukraine, which is good for the United States. But of all the problems that we're dealing with as a world and as a nation, the nuclear capability of Iran, their desire to continue to enrich at a level that has no commercial purpose. There is zero commercial purpose for uranium enriched at 60%. You only do that to have a threshold capability to make a weapon. And the difference between 60 and 90 is weeks, not months, not years. So we have laid out a resolution. We expect our colleagues in the Senate, Republicans and Democrats, who say they don't want a bomb, they oppose a bomb by Iran, to jump on board. We're reinforcing Secretary Rubio, Steve Witkoff, and the administration's position of dismantlement, and then, and only then, talking about a 1, 2, 3 agreement for peaceful nuclear power. I am hoping that we can get a lot of co-sponsors quickly. We can take this to the floor of the United States Senate and aid the effort that the Trump administration has embarked upon to make sure Iran never gets a nuclear bomb. Senator Cotton.
Thank you. Good morning. A horrible one-sided deal that should never, ever have been made. It didn't bring calm, it didn't bring peace, and it never will. Those words are as true today as they were 7 years ago today when President Trump said them, driving a stake through the heart of Barack Obama's disastrous nuclear deal with Iran. That deal was one-sided, in bad faith, and did nothing to stop Iran's march to a nuclear weapon. In fact, as Prime Minister Netanyahu said, it didn't block Iran's path to a nuclear weapon, it paved the path. 4 years of impotent, inconsistent, and weak foreign policy during the Biden administration also gave Iran a golden opportunity to continue its development of nuclear weapons and to rebuild its economy after President Trump's successful maximum pressure policy during his first term, an opportunity that Iran's crazed theocratic ayatollahs took full advantage of. During the Biden administration, Iran began enriching uranium up to near weapons grade. In February of this year, the IAEA reported that Iran has between 5 and 7 metric tons of enriched uranium and more than 600 pounds of 60% highly enriched uranium. If further enriched, this is enough uranium for 6 nuclear weapons. Now, to be blunt, there's no benign or good reason for Iran to have any of this, and it's proof in and of itself that Iran cannot be trusted with key parts of the nuclear fuel cycle, particularly the infrastructure and expertise needed to enrich or reprocess uranium. This is what happens when a bad deal and indecisive American leadership leave Iran's nuclear ambitions virtually unchecked. Look at what Iran already does without nuclear weapons. They threaten American troops in the region. They support terrorism by arming Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis. Further, consider what Iran has also tried to do here: assassinate Donald Trump and other U.S. government current and former officials. All of this, again, done without Iran having the cover of a nuclear weapon. A nuclear Iran makes for a far more dangerous world. It would directly threaten the security of our homeland when married up to their intercontinental missile work. It encourages nuclear proliferation throughout the Middle East. It jeopardizes the safety of our men and women in uniform, and it poses an existential threat to our good friend Israel. So I'm not mincing words here, and neither has President Trump. Iran can never be allowed to have a nuclear weapon, and Iran cannot be allowed to have a pathway to a nuclear weapon. As Senator Graham said, as President Trump has said, that means the complete dismantlement of its nuclear program. There is no reason for Iran to have centrifuges or to enrich uranium. So we urge our colleagues to support this resolution, which echoes the letter President Trump sent to the Supreme Leader of Iran 2 months ago. It also poses Iran with a simple choice. Iran can either have a nuclear weapon or a nuclear program that is lying in ruins, smoking, destroyed, and dismantled, or it can have a peaceful civilian nuclear power program with no centrifuges, no enriching, no reprocessing, and no pathway to a nuclear weapon. All of this will be done in a verifiable manner under IAEA safeguards. So we commend President Trump's consistent and unwavering efforts to prevent a nuclear Iran, and we look forward to working with him and the administration to achieve this goal. Thank you, and we'll now open the floor to questions.
Senator, what should our economic relationship with Iran look like after
Lindsey, do you want to take it? Do you want me to?
I think it depends on what they do. It's just not the nuclear program. That's one of several things that have to change. If they dismantle their nuclear program in a way that would allow us to have a 1, 2, 3 agreement, that's a start. Their missile program must be deterred and changed. Their support for terrorism throughout the region must end. If they did all these things, maybe we could have a normal relationship with Iran on the economic front. The key word is normal. There's nothing normal about this regime. They openly talk about destroying the Jewish state, and today's the 80th anniversary of the end of the war in Europe, May 8th, I believe. 80 years ago today, we destroyed Nazi Germany that tried to kill all the Jews. And what Tom and I are doing, along with President Trump, is taking off the table to do that in 2025 and beyond. So I think this is a poetic day. It's the 60-day mark from the letter that President Trump sent to the Ayatollah. 60 days ago, he sent a letter. But it's the 80th anniversary of the end of the war in Europe that brought us the Holocaust. And I think our friends in Israel, one Holocaust is aplenty. So I am hoping to have a normal relationship with Iran, but they have to be normal, and they're anything but normal.
And I would add what President Trump and Senator Graham and I have long said is that while Iran has killed thousands of Americans and fomented terrorism and violence throughout the Middle East, it's worth remembering that the first and the worst victims of the Ayatollah's regime are the Iranian people themselves. And as President Trump has said, we would love for the Iranian people to live in peace and prosperity, but their regime has to behave like a normal regime. The nuclear weapons threat is the most urgent and most serious threat, but Iran still has a space launch program, which is flimsy cover for a ballistic missile program. It still supports terrorism. It still oppresses its own people. The United States imposes sanctions on Iran for all of those behaviors. So while we would welcome an end to Iran's nuclear weapons program, the easy way or the hard way, it would only be a first step towards having any kind of normal relationship with Tehran.
Senator Cotton, Iran is a lot weaker today than they were a year ago, or that Hezbollah has been eliminated as a proxy or seriously weakened. Their missile attack on Israel have been intercepted. What is your assessment on whether that makes them more likely to reach a deal along the lines that you have outlined today? And what is your assessment on how that has impacted their desire for a nuclear weapon or their decision-making on whether to restart the nuclear program?
Well, I think Iran has always lived in mortal terror of the United States and what the United States might do to the Ayatollahs, especially when we have a strong president like Donald Trump or Ronald Reagan. When President Trump directed the killing of Iran's terrorist mastermind in January of 2020, Iran largely pulled in its horns for the rest of President Trump's first term. When Ronald Reagan sank half of Iran's navy in 1988, Iran again pulled in its horns. It stopped mining the Arabian Gulf, and within just a few months, the 8-year Iran-Iraq war ended. A reporter asked President Reagan in the midst of that conflict as he walked across the South Lawn to Marine One if we were now at war with Iran. And Reagan chuckled, as he often did, and said, no, Iran wouldn't be so stupid. And Iran has been exposed in many ways over the last year, both through the destruction of most of its air and missile defenses by Israel in retaliation last year when when Iran struck Israel, and also by the devastation that Israel has visited upon Hamas and Hezbollah, and that we've done to Iran's proxies in Yemen. So I think there's no question that Iran is in a much weaker position to deter military action if that's necessary to end its nuclear program. The president recognizes that. Leaders in the region recognize that. Most notably, the Ayatollahs recognize that. And I think they, again, are deathly afraid. Now, they probably hope that they can bluff the president or tap him along in a way that minimizes the threat to their nuclear weapons program. But the simplest way for them to avoid such action is to completely dismantle their program, to turn over their centrifuges, to turn over their uranium, and at that point, as Senator Graham has said, we could talk about some kind of civilian nuclear program, a program that a couple dozen nations around the world have, none of whom enrich uranium.
That's fine. That's good.
Does the Senate need to approve a deal in order for it to last into the future?
Well, I think obviously, if any other nation wants the most durable and lasting kind of agreement with the United States, it would be in a treaty form. And that was one reason why President Obama's deal was so weak, and something that I and Senator Graham and most other Republican senators cautioned the Ayatollahs about before reaching that deal, is that an agreement between the American president, whoever he or she may be, and a foreign leader can be reversed by future presidents, which President Trump rightly did 7 years ago today. So if they want the most durable and lasting kind of deal, then they'd want to bring it to the Senate and have it voted on as a treaty.
I think the statute that I think Senator Cotton helped lead regarding us having a say about the JCPOA, what's the name of that statute?
The Iran Nuclear Agreement Review Act.
Yeah, so that allowed us to at least have a say about it. It wasn't a treaty. I think at a minimum that would happen, but I talked to actually Secretary Rubio about this. A treaty with Iran in this space is only possible if you get 67 votes. There's no way you're going to get 67 votes unless they completely dismantle and shut down the path that Senator Cotton has described toward a nuclear weapon in a way that's verifiable. But also, you're not going to get a 67 votes for a treaty regarding their nuclear program unless they deal with the missile program and their terrorism activity. So is it possible? Yes, if Iran changes. I would urge the Ayatollah to seriously consider what Secretary Rubio and Witkoff are proposing. You can have what you claim you want, which is a peaceful nuclear power program, if you dismantle. But it's more than that. You can have a better relationship with the United States if you do the things that Senator Cotton laid out. Without fundamental change, there is no pathway to a treaty in the United States Senate.
And I would just add to that Senator Graham is right. I mean, Barack Obama's nuclear deal with Iran was hugely controversial because it was so weak, because it paved their path to a nuclear weapon. That's why it was opposed not just by Republicans, but by Democrats as well, to include Chuck Schumer, the Democratic leader in the Senate. I don't foresee a situation in which we'd be voting on a deal that would resemble anything like President Obama's deal, and therefore would be so hugely controversial. Secondarily, on the nuclear power front, it's also customary in some cases for the Congress, not just the Senate, to pass ordinary legislation that supports the so-called 1, 2, 3 agreements we have with other countries around the world to provide them with peaceful civilian nuclear power.
Two questions. First, when you spoke to Trump or other negotiators, did they suggest that the Iranians have expressed any sort of willingness to consider full dismantlement? That's the first question. Second, Senator Graham, you've been in pretty frequent contact with the Saudis while trying to get a deal to normalize relations with Israel. Have the Saudis expressed to you how they would respond if Iran were to obtain a nuclear weapon?
I'll answer the first part of the question, and I'll just say, as I sometimes do with President Trump, what you see is what you get. What he says to the American people is what he says to me, and I suspect what he says to Senator Graham as well. He's been totally clear in public, and he's repeated that in our conversations, that he wants the Iranian people to live in peace and prosperity, but we cannot allow the Iranian regime to have a nuclear weapon or have a path to a nuclear weapon. That's why total dismantlement of their nuclear program has to be the goal. That's exactly what he said in public and exactly what he said to me in our conversations as well.
Yeah, I can't add any more to that other than I talked to him about that this weekend. And he wants to pursue a diplomatic solution that achieves the goal. And the goal is to make sure they can't have a nuclear bomb by dismantling the process that would allow them to do it. Shut down the path, as Senator Cotton outlined. That is the foundation of any future relationship with Iran. As to Saudi Arabia, I don't want to speak for the country, but I'm fairly involved with them. I think if Iran achieved a nuclear weapon, Saudi and others in the region would act in kind. But they prefer a diplomatic solution. I talked to them yesterday. Dismantlement of Iran's nuclear capability that would lead them to a bomb would be welcome news throughout the region. One last question.
Just ask if you have any reaction to the idea of changing the name of the Persian Gulf. It sounds like Trump might announce this later on. Do you feel like that is something that...
So I think to correct the premise of your question, you mean the Arabian Gulf. As our military has long called it, and as most Arab nations in the region have called it as well, I have no issue with that at all. I think it reflects well on our relationship with our friends on the Arabian Peninsula that are our friends, to use the custom and practice that they do, as opposed to worry about sensitivities with Tehran.
And I will just end it, we have to go here, is how long does this take? What's the end game here? Is to have a peaceful resolution, as we've described, that would be good for the region, good for the world. How much longer will this go on? We're talking weeks, not months, not years. The potential of Iranian breakout looms large here. Israel's desire to bring closure to this issue looms large here. Senator Cotton's desire, my desire to end this debate with some sense of finality looms large here. So we're not talking about long, protracted negotiations. It's a pretty clear choice. If you want peaceful nuclear power, here's the requirements to achieve that. If you want to be considered a normal nation, here's what you have to do to be considered normal. These things are fairly clear, not overly complicated. Dismantlement means exactly what we say, dismantle. Read the resolution. A 1, 2, 3 agreement, they're used all over the world. It's nothing exotic. It's beyond the nuclear program, it's the missile program, it's the support for terrorism. So making it clear what they need to do, I think we're helping achieve today. I think the Senate's on board with the Trump approach to solving this problem. But I just want to emphasize, we're talking about weeks, not months.